In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. All right, now I know how to press the buttons. I got that wrong for a second there. Hi, welcome to Materialise, the Launch Tabletop podcast, where we talk about turning game ideas into tangible objects. Today is the 2nd of June, 2023, and this is episode 26. Today we're chatting with Matthew Dunstan about designing mass market games and his recent Spiel de Jahres, which I think I pronounced possibly right, I don't know, maybe wrong, 2023 nomination for Next Station London. All right, so we are here. It's just me today, no other hosts. Unfortunately, everyone's a bit busy. But I'm joined by Matthew. Hello, Matthew.
Hi, Eris. How you going?
I'm all right, as you know, a little bit rushed. But that's cool. So yeah, you've I haven't got this in my notes, but that's okay. You've been on the show before I think it was about 10 episodes ago, almost exactly. I think it was episode 16 you were on. If my memory is correct, I did look it up beforehand. So if my memory is correct,
You're setting up an expectation now. Do I have to come back for the 36th and the 46th?
oh boy, look. I probably won't put that pressure on you. It's okay. Don't worry.
Oh, it'd be my pleasure.
But one of the things that for people that might be interested is on the last episode you're on, we talked about some of the financial side of games, and I know that that's a topic that is very interesting. So for anyone who may have missed it, I recommend going back into our back catalogue and have a look and just have a listen, because I know, like, I learned a lot of stuff from what you were sharing, so it was really good. So, we are here today, and I'm going to do my little introduction pre-written thing. So, this is a thing. Matthew is a prolific game designer, having worked on numerous games, including Elysium, the Guild of Merchant Explorers, and the Adventure Game series, Monumental, Relic Runners, Fairy Tale, and the recent Spiel de Jahres nominee, Next Station London, and more. Like, you've done a lot of games. Like, you've got a lot under your belt. So, was that pretty accurate? Did I get all those things right?
It's very kind. I'm not sure about the prolific bit, but like other.
Well, okay. Look, if depending on how you define prolific, I think on Board Game Geek you've got 70 titles listed.
Wow, but that's
there.
always. I think, as we said last time, it's always a bit. BGG is a bit of a cheat. So anyway, I'll take.
True. But even if we halved, even if we said that half of them were like unique titles, or even a third, that's still, like, I think that's a lot. Like, so. That's really cool. One of the things that some people may not know is, what is Spiel de Jahres? Are you able to maybe just give a little, like, synopsis of what the award is, or what the kind of idea is behind it?
Yeah. So Spiel des Jahres is the German game of the year. I think this is.
No, that's right.
I've got to perfect it for if I go. They're the German Game of the Year awards, and I think they were founded in the 80s, actually, or even the 70s.
Okay.
They've been around for quite a while, and essentially it's to recognise the Game of the Year. But maybe unlike other awards, really the focus of it is to sort of spread gaming, throughout the populace, and especially focused on games which are accessible for mass market for as many people as possible, especially families. And so, the awards now have a real focus on sort of recommending games to your average German family buyer who might only play buy one or two new games a year. Yes. And it's kind of a stamp of sort of trust in saying, like, if we've awarded this Game of the Year, we think that you're going to have fun with it, sort of almost no matter what. And more recently they added a few other categories. They added the Kinderspiel, which is for a children's game. And they added the Kennerspiel, which is sort of for a connoisseur game, is sort of like the next step up. So
which I know you may not mention, but you were nominated for Elysium back in 2016, I think, or something like that.
Yeah, I think it was,
or 17.
15 or 16. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not a heavy game. I think those who might be used to Board Game Geek or the Hobby, those games are even heavier than the ones they're like, you've played a few of the Game of the Year games. Maybe you want something more. Here's something for that. So. And then they nominate three games to be the nominees. They have a long list as well of, I think, sometimes up to another 5 or 6 games, which they think are, kind of recommended and worth looking at. They have three sort of nominees, finalists, and then they announce the winner at a ceremony later in July, effectively.
And I do have it in the description for the episode on YouTube, but I'll just quickly chuck a banner in for the link because I hadn't prepared that. So if anyone is interested in having a look at this year's nominees for all the different awards, if you just head to that website, which I will try and read out, Spiel, SPIEL JAHRES-DE/EN/award-winners-2023. That will give you the full list of the everyone that's been nominated, as well as some of those other ones that you just mentioned that were kind of recommended. Or what did you call it? I don't know.
Yeah, they're kind of recommended, like a long
yeah,
list kind of thing.
Yeah. I will admit, like, I haven't played any of the ones that were nominated, including your game. I'm sorry, but
I'm off. That's it.
That's it. You're off. Yeah, that's it. That's podcast over. But I noticed that the Dorf Romantic or Dorf. Yeah, I don't know how to say you pronounce
Romantic,
that.
Yeah, I think.
From memory, that was a video game originally. Like, I remember
it is
hearing about
that's
that.
an IP adaptation by Pegasus. The other thing which I didn't say, is that to be eligible for the award, it has to have released in the German language.
Yes.
So that's sometimes why you get some games which haven't come to English yet, so you might not have heard of them. Sometimes you also get games which came to English quite a while ago, but have only more recently been
brought over,
translated into German. I think Iki in the Kennerspiel, IKI, that game I think is actually several years old from an English release, but it only just came out in German recently, so that's why it's now eligible for the award. So that's the other thing to kind of take into account, and why sometimes it doesn't quite. Again, it's like a domestic German award. That's the most important thing. And so,
and that's who they're targeting with their
exactly.
And just to, because we've now named two of them, the third game that's been nominated is called Fun Facts,
which is sort of a fun. It's a sort of a party game from the same kind of line as So Clover and Just One. By Casper Lapp, and it's sort of a game of everybody, and you get a question which is sort of like, how creative do you think you are on a scale from 0 to 100? And everybody writes their own answer, and then it's actually a cooperative game where you're trying to figure out what order you think you are all in without actually knowing each other's answers effectively.
That does sound interesting. Yeah, I'm definitely interested. Actually, all the three nominations I'm interested in because, like, I really enjoy this weight game, like the kind of lighter, kind of family friendly, or whatever you want to call it, mass market kind of game. And I think it's because for me personally, I like playing games with people, and I find that generally I'm not around a lot of gamers all the time, and so like getting like some of the bigger games or more complicated games to the table can be challenging, whereas something that I can teach in 10 minutes or less and we can play is sort of got more chance of happening. So congratulations on your nomination. When does everything get announced? Is it at Essenspiel, or is it beforehand, or how does it work?
They have their own award ceremony, and I think it's in the middle of July. I think around July 16th, 17th, something like that. They have a dinner where the different the Kinderspiel is earlier. It's in Hamburg, normally a few weeks before, but the Kinderspiel and the Spiel are at that ceremony, and they have a big kind of reveal and. A bit of that, they try and get the press there and things like that. So I think things have changed a little bit since I was there in 2015. So it'll be a bit of a surprise this time.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, all the best, and whatever happens, I hope that like obviously just getting nominated is like just phenomenal. Like that's a huge thing. So we'll move on to some questions. I will also just change my screen so I can see things a bit better. For those who might be used to watching our show, we normally go for an hour. I'm aiming to keep this episode a little bit shorter because we're trying to just make it a bit more accessible for a wider audience. So, hey, that's the topic of the show, isn't it? Like, it's both our podcast and games in general. So I think the first question I want to ask you, Matthew, is what part of the game design process brings you the most personal like joy or satisfaction? Like, what do you love most about making games? What part of it?
Oh, good question to start with. I think there's two different ones.
It's one is really small and easy.
Yeah, one is the kind of initial idea. I think when you make games for a certain amount of time, you are used to, you have to have a lot of ideas because otherwise, you're not going to have any games to work on. Yeah. I think it's the moment when you have a good idea. It's very easy to have a lot of ideas, but and
Yes.
a lot of them are bad. And you think about them
Yeah.
for a bit, and then you go like, "Oh no, that's not going to work." But it's the moment when you have an idea and it kind of sticks with you, and you think about it the next day, and you question it a bit, and like, "Oh, actually," so it's that kind of initial excitement of like, "Oh, I found a good one," which, by
Yes.
the way, doesn't mean it will be a good game, but at least
Of
it's a
course.
good start. And the other point is where when I know a game is going to get finished, and
Okay.
from the design point of view. So
Yes.
there's sort of an initial process where you have the idea, and then you make a first prototype, and it's usually terrible. You
Yeah.
make a second prototype, maybe it's a little bit better, but maybe it's also terrible.
Yeah.
And there's sort of a moment where there's a tipping point where you go like, "Oh, I know this game's going to be okay. I know this game is going to be finished." It might not be
Okay.
finished at that point. It might still have stuff
Yep.
that has to be changed or optimized, but you kind of know that all the big problems have been solved, or you kind of can see what the game is. Even sometimes it's like, I have three different choices which are all completely different for this game, but
Yeah.
this particular choice is it. So it's that kind of moment of, I guess it's relief actually
Yeah.
sometimes,
Yeah.
where you sort of you put all this effort in, and it's going to turn into a finished design, which doesn't mean it's going to
Yes.
be published, because that's a whole different kettle of
Yes.
fish
That's
you
like the
can
whole
find.
state. Different. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly, but you get your own. I guess it's that satisfaction. And I think for me, at the end of the day, I'm still a designer first, and then a publisher or
Yeah.
product person or promotion. So
Yeah.
finishing a
Yeah.
design is always nice. So yeah.
How do you like? This is a unscripted question, but do you have a personal kind of like way that you, when you feel like, okay, I'm done with that, I can move on? Because I know for me, like I have no, like it's different for every game, and I never really have a set thing. But I know other people kind of, some other people have things that they are looking for that, tell them, okay, this is finished from that design point of view, and I can move on. Like, do you have anything,
I
or is it more just a kind of gut feeling? Like,
I think it's, can I show this to a publisher and feel like okay with it, and feel not sort of
okay,
ashamed or like I'm wasting their time? I guess because I'm always thinking, that's generally my thought, is that I'm going to pitch it to a publisher and try and get them
yes,
to make the game. So yeah, if I
yes,
feel like I would be comfortable and sort of not exactly proud, but at least
yeah,
happy with what I'm showing,
yeah,
and not, thinking, not showing something and going like, "Oh, I know something's wrong with it," or "I know that I
mm,
would change this." I think it's that moment where you don't have an obvious thing that you would change. Okay, there's
yeah,
always things that you could think like, "Oh, maybe that could be a bit better," but if you don't have a clear idea about
yes,
it, that's the kind of the point where I'm like, maybe I don't have any big changes to go. And also because once a publisher is going to take it, they're going to make a lot of those small changes anyway. So I try not to
yeah.
worry about the last 10%,
Yeah,
because
interesting. Yeah.
they're going to change that 10% anyway. But that's me. It's not the same for
Yeah,
everyone.
yeah. No, it's interesting. We have a comment from the Dice Men Cometh, and they say, "G'day, Eris and Matthew. Congrats on the STJ nomination. When are you releasing your epic Eurovision heavy Euro, Matthew?
I
I'm
think they're
assuming."
referring to the time I was on the dice, but we bonded over love of Eurovision, which I'm a bit sad about
Ah,
now that I'm back in Australia. I can't watch it live, or at least not as easily as I used to be able
yeah.
to. Yes, that. Unfortunately, is a bit on the back burner at the moment. I'm afraid. But one day, one day.
But imagine getting the IP, like the license for that. That would be like a huge, like, aside from the game design side of it, just the getting the Eurovision, like license would be huge. I
I would
reckon.
probably just ask them to not pay me royalties and just give me a ticket, because I remember the few times I tried to get a ticket, it was,
Yeah.
it does the like online balloting, and it was just,
Oh wow.
and of course the year I moved away from Europe, it ended
Yeah.
up being in the UK, which was like one of the countries I lived in. So it was sort of like, anyway, it's the way it goes.
Ah, funny. All right. Well, we'll move on. I'll move on. So do you intentionally design for a specific audience, or do you just have like a general game idea and then you kind of refine or define the audience after you've started working on, the mechanics or the concept for the game?
I think they have to come together. I think more and more, I think of things, like product focused design. And if you think of something as a product, a big component of a product is the audience that
Yeah.
it's for. And so, yeah, I think, the audience, or like at least a typical person I think could play the game, is quite important. I maybe think
Yeah.
about it a little bit also in terms of like publishers, which is, I think, a bit of a shorthand for audience, because most
Yeah.
publishers have a set audience as well. Except
Yeah.
that, like, there are some publishers which have incredibly broad, they make games of all sorts, but most of them, like, the whole point is that they want to have loyal people who, like, oh, it's the
Yeah.
next Cosmos game. I liked all the other Cosmos games. There's a good chance I'm going to like this one. So,
Hmm.
I think of it like that, which I think is a substitute for audience, because I think at the end of the day, again, because I'm focused on I need to sell it to a publisher. I need
Yes.
to be able to do their job. The better I could do their job for them,
Yep.
and say like, oh look, I've already made it ready for the audience you want to make your game for. I've thought about
Yep.
that. That
Yep.
helps that process go well. But
Mm.
it's not always. It's easier for some things than others. I guess some games have a very defined audience. Like if you think of like trading card games, for example,
Yep.
um, you can think about that typical player very easily. But there are other things like, and when you go into broader mass market, it's a more varied audience. So it's a bit harder to, and of course you try and aim for, a common thing, but amongst those people, which usually means lower complexity. But it can be a bit harder because you look at the range of, say, mass market games that are incredibly varied. You think of something like Micro Macro, it's you're looking on a sheet and finding things, or even.
I actually don't know that game, to be honest with you. That's one I've not heard of.
Oh well, Micro Macro it won the Spiel Jahres 2 years ago, I think.
There you go. I'm out of the loop. Okay.
I think cooperative Where's Wally is maybe the best.
Okay. Wow.
It comes with a
I will look it up.
black and white paper map, which is easily like bigger than A0. Like it's huge.
Okay.
And with this very small cartoon, black and white cartoon, which is a fictional town, and you get these cases, and you can see characters move through the town, like it's like snapshots. So they might be on the corner and they have a bag, and then you see them on the next corner and maybe they don't have the bag, and you might see the bag has been dropped somewhere on the way. So you're kind of seeing these snapshots, and you kind of put them together as like, oh, the person walked from that point to that point and dropped the bag. And you've got to kind of follow these clues and work out what happened in all these cases. And there's like 20 cases in the box or something. I would really recommend. And again, there's no rules almost. I mean, that's the thing. It's effectively like the cards, they're questions. It's like, where did this person go? What did they do? And you just look, that's it. And you share that experience with each other.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So you were in the middle of saying, so you got kind of that end of the spectrum for the mass market, and then
but you also have some more strategic games which have rules. You think of something like Pandemic or Carcassonne, or maybe they weren't originally considered to be mass market games, but they certainly have broken out. Even Wingspan has a huge audience and a huge So, but of course, those games have a much greater degree of diverse complexity or themes and things like that. So it's a bit harder to kind of pin that down, I guess.
Yeah. One thing, like I remember years ago, so there's a mobile game called Crossy Road, which you may or may not have heard of. It's been ported to many platforms. It was made by some Australian developers in Melbourne. I think around 2015 or so, 2014, 2015 originally. And I remember listening to them talk about their process, and one of the things because Crossy Road was a very like a mass kind of video game, like it was very simple, like it was aimed at a wide audience, whatever. But one of the things they mentioned that when they begin each of their projects, they think of a very specific person. Like they kind of, if it's not a real person, they make up a person, but sometimes they will use an actual human who they know, and they try and make the game that's kind of like perfect for that person. And then the theory is sort of then that kind of anyone that overlaps with any of that kind of person's taste or interest or whatever will get something from the game. And I think it's an interesting way, because I think sometimes when I've tried to approach making a game that's aimed at a wide audience, you kind of get this thing of like, oh well, you're trying to appeal to like everybody, and then you're not really appealing to anybody potentially, like depending on how you do it. Like it might not be that exciting for anybody. So, yeah, I know. It was interesting. Like I remember listening to that and thinking that was an interesting way of kind of approaching the problem. Like, yeah.
But your point is still very true. You still have to stand out. I mean, it's still, if you're thinking about a commercial game, you still have to. And I think even for mass markets, it's even more important, because you have you have one sentence to tell somebody what the game is, and they have to be interested from that. Just like maybe how I described Micro Macro, for example. If you can't,
which was effective.
If you can't convey, the game and why I should play it or why it might be interesting in that very short period of time, that's all most people will give you, right? If you haven't got to the point by that, like they're on to the next thing, or it's too complex if it takes you 30 seconds to explain. Because of course, if you play a lot of games and these more heavy strategic Euros or whatever, you might, if you describe why you like that game, if you described it to anybody, they might go, that doesn't sound that fun. Like, why?
Yes.
It's not that obvious. And of course, there's a beauty to that. But
Yeah.
thinking about mass markets, you have to get to the point.
But also, I think like if you play a lot of games and you learn like I guess the lingo, you'll be like, oh, this is you'll describe mechanics. Like, you'll be like, oh, this is a deck building, worker placement, whatever kind of game. And for someone who knows all that stuff, it makes perfect sense, and they can maybe like conceptualize the thing. But if I'm talking to just like a friend of mine who doesn't really play many games, it's going to mean nothing. Like, whereas if you said, hey, it's a game about collecting flowers and putting them into like pots and, doing this thing, then they might be like, oh, okay, I can kind of picture what that is. Like, that's something I can understand. Yeah, interesting. So in your playtesting process, do you do anything differently when you're playtesting games that aimed at a mass market audience compared to the ones that are aimed at a more hobby audience, like your more complex games?
Probably, I don't think the process is particularly different. Although I suspect I try and be a bit harsher in the process, in this, just knowing that you can't get away with things like, even drafting, for example. Like when you sit down, I think it comes also when you write the rules, maybe not so much in the playtesting, when you realize how much real estate in the rules you're giving to explaining what is a fairly straightforward mechanism for some people. You realize like that doesn't have a place in that mass market game, because you're spending all this time explaining this thing, which ultimately is not that important. It's not really, why the game's interesting or fun. And so I think the bar of what's sort of acceptable in, I think of more of the results that are coming out of the playtesting and sort of going like, oh, that took a bit too long. Like a much more, how long is the game taking, or how if people weren't understanding things. Sometimes if I know it's going to be for, say, a more strategic, heavier audience, I'll sort of go, okay, I can expect there's going to be a little bit of leeway there. If there's a little bit of confusion, okay, that audience is used to maybe overcoming that, or I know with a bit of editing in the rules and things that will probably help that. But if I see that for a mass market game, that's a real problem, because rules writing isn't really going to help you there. Rules have to be so intuitive, effectively. Like you almost have to explain the game and people guess what the rules are. Like those are the best kind of mass market games, because again, that's still the biggest impediment for people to picking up and actually playing the games, is learning the rules. And the quicker you can get to that, and again, especially the more intuitive that can be. Another big problem is when a player expects something to work something one way and it doesn't, and that is always going to be a gap in trying to understand how to play the game. It's going to be a frustration. So it's trying to, in the playtesting process, to really iron out those kinks and those unintuitive things, and you have to just be much harsher on what the results of that testing is, I'd say.
I was looking through eBay a couple of days ago and looking at vintage board games, because it just was coming up, and it wasn't an intentional search. I was looking for other things and they were popping up in the results anyway. But I was reminded of a lot of, like, in Australia we had the Milton Bradley brand, and then there's other licensees, but like they're around in like the 80s particularly. But one of the things that I was reminded of is that they had like a certain rectangular kind of size, which was about like an inch thick or whatever, like, or 2 inches thick. And one of the things I was reminded was that on almost all the games, the rules are completely written on the back of the box, or just like if you lift up the lid, they're on the insert, and the components are taking up a tiny part. And it's like, and there's no rule book. Like, that is all the rules, and it was just a reminder of like, getting that simple is really good. Now, I don't know if all of them were a good rule. Like, they might have been terrible rules and hard to follow and maybe left information out. I don't know for all the games, but it certainly was a little reminder for me of just like, oh, okay, like, people don't want to see a 12-page rule book necessarily. Like, if they're not playing games, like you said, like for the people that the SDJ is aimed at, they might only be buying 1 or 2 games a year, and not playing them all the time. So when you're working on, I guess, any game, but particularly these mass market ones, how much are you... Oh, actually, I think you've answered this question already, but I'm going to go ask it anyway. But how much are you thinking about the publishing factors? So things like, the size, the components, and the things that a publisher would normally worry about. Because I know you said before that you do try and solve some of those problems ahead of time, but are you thinking that specifically about, like, how heavy it might be, or how difficult it might be to make certain parts? Or is that you kind of just let them work that out?
Uh, it depends. I think there are certain things that I have some knowledge about, I guess, in terms of like overall number of components. But for example, there are other things like, say, custom plastic components. A lot of mass market games do have that. If you would talk to a lot of people talk, advice for new designers, don't come up with custom 3D printed parts and a whole bunch. But actually,
Yeah.
look at some mass market games; they have a lot of plastic in them that are, specifically
Yes.
for that game. So I guess my point is that there are some challenges on the strategic level that, because, like, for these Euros, you may be only printing 5,000 or something, so the
Yes.
cost is much more of an issue. But if you're going to do a mass market game and hundreds of thousands of copies, that is
Yes.
less of an issue. So I sort of leave that a little bit more to the publisher because they
Yep.
know more about that. I think the one thing I am also trying to think about is, again, that hook. I think it's more important to have some sort of, if not table presence, something kind of memorable, something. And actually, with Next Station London, I think one thing that throughout all the process I was really thinking about was the end result. Like, the end result is you're going to have a piece of paper with a reasonable looking metro map on it.
Yep.
And I thought that would be a fun thing for people to, even to, it's very visual. It's in some
Yes.
ways it's quite shareable. It's relatable to a lot of people, and you can kind of look at that and like, oh, that line's terrible. Where does that go? Does it, who would want to travel like that? There's something that you can connect with, I guess, that's
Yeah.
relatable, and that's the bit I think that stands out in the game, or at least
Okay.
helps to connect to that wider audience. And
Yeah.
different games can approach that problem in different ways. Sometimes it might be some amazing component, or when you see it on the table, it's beautiful, or maybe the theme is very compelling, or it really stands out.
Well, I was
There's
going to say, like, I think with the Next Station London, like, I haven't played it, but I watched a video to try and get an idea about what it's about. But I think one of the things that is probably and whether I don't know how deliberate it was in terms of your intention, but the fact that it's about like train routes and like using the metro map kind of style as the kind of inspiration. I think that's been so many countries around the world have adopted, and cities have adopted that style of map. So I think there's a level of like, oh, I get that, like I understand what that's about. It's something that I've seen a lot before because I've caught a lot of trains or just whatever. And so I think that is a really nice like hook into then figuring out the game. So yeah, like was that like part of, did that kind of just evolve because you were coming up with the mechanics, or was that kind of in your mindset to begin with that you wanted that to be there's something that people can grasp quickly?
I think the visual identity is really important, and I think that kind of it being intuitive. I was talking about things being intuitive. It's not just the rules; it can be that kind of the appearance of the game. I probably was either specifically, like consciously or unconsciously, influenced by Mini Metro, which is a video game.
Yep.
Also about
And
making.
it's a very good one. I think that's also made by some Aussies, isn't it? I think that's another Melbourne or Sydney design
Oh,
team.
really? Okay, I don't know
I
who is the developers.
my look, maybe I've got my facts wrong. I have a memory of because there's a design space or like a co-working space in Melbourne that I don't know if it's still around, but where a lot of video game developers could share a working space, and it was called the Arcade. And I'm really certain that there was some friends used to do some board game playtesting there, and so I used to go along occasionally. And I have this memory of like Mini Metro being somewhere connected to that, but I could be making it all up, and maybe they were just raving about like that. Maybe they're playing the game, like I don't know, but yeah, it's a good game. And actually, it was funny you mentioned that because when I was watching the video describing the thing, I'm like, this kind of reminds me of Mini Metro a little bit, like, and it was particularly the crossing the river. Like, I think that was the part that I was just like, oh, that kind of has an echo of that. So yeah,
Yeah, and I mean both games are trying to echo the actual visual appearance
yes,
of Metro Map. So I think using that kind of like design, graphic language, was quite. And we tried to even with the pencil colors, we're trying to evoke some of the colors. I mean, also the kind of,
yeah,
you have to have for color blindness, and you have to have good contrast and all
yes,
that sort of stuff. But and I mean that's for Next Station London, that's the talents of also Maxime Morin, who this game really required an illustrator who has talent not just in illustration, but really it's a very kind of, I wouldn't. I mean, you'd be better at describing it than me, Harris, but like kind of iconographic, like just sort of
yes,
informational kind of way of. I don't know how to put it, but it has a very distinct style, I guess, which helps, I think, a lot.
Yeah, and it is definitely echoing the your maps. I don't want to go down too deep of a rabbit hole, but for anyone that's interested, I recommend Googling. I think it's Charles Darrow. Darrow is the designer of the Metro map, and I think there's a YouTube channel called Mapmen, and I'm pretty certain they have done a couple of episodes talking about its development, and it's quite interesting, like just the story of how it came to be.
Just one up on that, if people are interested. There's even a video I saw recently about the maquette, which is on the tube, it's the seat covering, like the kind of the material, and there's a pattern on it. And somebody has a job his only job is, well, amongst other things, design the different maquettes for the different tube, and they're always inspired by different things in London. But there's all these other kind of technical aspects about what color you could have something in a kind of industrial setting and all these sort of things. So recommend looking up as well.
I know that I used to live in Melbourne, and I know that there was a lot of work that was on, like getting the patterns, because they had to meet, there was all these like regulations about what they had to meet, and there's all the, like, it's a really involved kind of thing. We have a comment from Lee saying apparently, was it Mini Metro, is that what we said before? Was a New Zealand game developer. So we in Australia can claim it. Why not? Like, we claim everyone else from New Zealand. So thank you for that, looking that up, fact checking us there, Lee. Much appreciated. So what am I going to ask now? I think I've got 2 questions left on my official list, and then we'll maybe move into the ending. When you're designing a mass market game, do you approach it differently if you're intending it for a kid, like children audience, compared to a more like adult audience? Like, even if it's not completely adult, like as in, but for adults to enjoy as well. Like, do you feel like there's different considerations that you work towards, or do you sort of treat them very similar?
No, definitely. I think children's games are the most different sort of thing you have to, because there's just such a different range of skills. And also the other thing is, actually, even within children's games, there's such a difference between, say, what a 3-year-old can comprehend in a game versus a 4-year-old versus a 5-year-old. Harbour, for example, is a German publisher. They've done lots of work over many decades, and you see their games are very accurate, very targeted at, this is a 2+ game, this is a 3+ game, this is a 4+ game. And you see at those ages, children have such rapid changes in what they're able to perceive. Like, are they able to perceive that they have cards in their hand and other players have different cards? Or are they able to work together? Do they have verbal skills that that they would be able to employ in the game? Can they recognize colors? Can they recognize symbols? Do they have any numerical, ability at that point? Can they recognize numbers? So all those things, I mean, those are huge things to work out whether a game can be comprehended, let alone enjoyed or understood by children. So that it is such a different sphere, and in terms of testing, it's also completely different, because you really need to test with children, and that's a very different process, because designers don't often have access to a huge pool of children.
I know a number of I've only got 5 published games, but I think 3 of them are like children friendly, right? Like they're the children audiences. And I remember with one of them, we were trying to get it to be playable by 6-year-olds and 5 or 6-year-olds, and I was lucky enough that my local game shop, which I went to all the time, the owner had 2 kids that were in the target age group, and they were hanging around one day, and I said, "Hey, can we play this game?" And so we played it, and one of the things that I'd had at that point was in the scoring, it was using multiplication. So it was like, if you get these cards multiplied by these cards, then you'll get your score. And I learned very quickly that they hadn't learned multiplication at school yet. They just didn't know how to do it. And so I was like, oh, well, even though I felt like it was a better game with multiplication, like the scoring was more interesting, I had to move just to normal addition, like just counting, adding the cards together. And it was like it was such an obvious thing after, like, they were just like, we've never learnt this. We don't know how to do that. Like, and I was just like, oh, yeah, of course you wouldn't have, like... So, there's a lot of things, and I think you're right, like, actually testing with people in your target market kind of makes a lot of sense, doesn't it?
And they're also so different. I think the thing is, it's just really different how, at least I think as a designer, like, I think I can approximate, like an adult who would buy a kind of a mass market game, or at least I'm closer to that.
Yep.
But I'm just so far away from what a child, and maybe it's different. Obviously I don't have any children myself. Maybe if you're a parent, you also have a different kind of concept of that. And
Perspective. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And you kind of seeing that, what's possible, what's even interesting to a kid, because it's also possible to make a game. Sometimes when I have worked with children's games with publishers, I'm thinking it has to be way similar, but they're like, no, this isn't going to be fun enough. There's not going to be enough stuff going on for the children.
Yep.
So yeah, finding that balance is much more difficult, I'd say.
I'm gonna give you a plug for your game, Fairy Tale from a few years ago, because I used to own it. I don't anymore because I gave it to a family who have kids and were gonna get a lot more enjoyment, play, not so much enjoyment, play from it than I. But I remember being very intrigued by your decision, because that one you have three main minis characters, but they're not actually controlled by everyone kind of can control them depending on what cards and stuff they've got and their objectives. And yeah, it was just really interesting. It was interesting to see how the kids did kind of respond to that and everything. And yeah, so I recommend anyone listening check out Fairy Tale and look if you're interested in a bit of a different system. I did have one. I think I actually at the time, this is before we actually chatted or anything. I think I sent you a tweet or a Facebook message or something, because I think the tie breaking rule in it, I really didn't like. Whatever decision you and because I think it was a co-design, wasn't it?
With Brett Gilbert,
yeah, with Brett Gilbert. But whatever the decision was that between you or the publisher, whoever decided the tie break at the end, if this thing, I can't remember what it was, but I remember I was very unsatisfied. It wasn't the kind of rule I wanted to have, and I was just like, why did you choose this rule? And I think you just responded, I don't know, just kind of what, you had no memory of why it came, and it was just like, yeah, okay, fair enough. But it was just funny. It was just such a no. It was just a minor thing. It was such a little. But it was. I think it was only because we had a game where there was a tie. And it was like, oh, okay. Well, what do we do? Yeah, it was just silly things. But but then going kind of connecting that into the topic, regular players aren't thinking that. They're not thinking about the tiebreak rules. Most of the time, unless that's going to help them win. That's probably when they care. Is oh, if it can help them win, then they'll care. But
it's also starting player advantage. Nobody cares about if you had one more turn than somebody else generally. Whereas, if you get around gamers, they're like, oh no, you got to go first. Why don't I have an equal number of turns? All this sort of stuff. But other people don't care.
Exactly. I know one thing that I definitely didn't come up with the idea myself. I think I heard it from someone else, but I absolutely stole it. Was for games aimed at kids, what I tend to do now is, unless there's a really specific starting player, reason to have a certain player start or whatever, what I usually try and do now is I say the youngest player chooses who goes first, rather than youngest player just goes first, because they might not want to go first. Are you there? Or have you frozen? I can't tell if the video feed's working. Oh, there you go. The video feed's frozen, but yeah, and so one of the things I do now is youngest chooses, and yeah, sure, a lot of the time they choose themselves, but sometimes I've discovered that they'll be like, oh no, I'd rather mum or dad go first, because I want to, I think going second or whatever is, they prefer that. And so it's a little thing that I've started doing, which sort of leads into, I guess, the final question is there a kind of a little nugget of wisdom or some kind of piece of knowledge that you've kind of picked up along the way when you're designing for mass market that has sort of shifted or evolved how you process it, and been really useful for you for making designing for mass market games? So I guess a little piece of wisdom.
I think it's just a general thing of trying to reduce just rules full stop, the number of rules, and especially exceptions. Exceptions are just really the bane of things. Even things like different ways in which games have to be set up, or the players have to check a rule book, or it's every point where you're getting a player to remember all that's you have sort of a budget, and where are you going to spend that budget? And especially any change you can make to the game, which say deletes a rule or condenses one, you had two different cases, but now it's only one. There's a real reason why a lot of games, they don't say, oh, here are 4 different actions, choose one. Often it's just you do one thing on your turn sort of thing, because those are where are you going to spend that kind of rules budget, and really just be ruthless on any sort of exceptions or set up things, because often there's lots of ways in which you can construct a game, so you don't need those things. If you have to explain 6 cards in a deck in a different way, get rid of those 6 cards. That doesn't have a place, at least in those, I would say, in those more mass market games. Now, of course, your experience may vary, and obviously that's going to depend on the game. But I think as a general fact, and I think you alluded to earlier as well, is that often designers are gamers. They play a lot of different games. They're familiar with mechanisms. It's very hard. It's very easy to make them more complicated than you think.
Yeah.
And you have to really actually go against your own intuition, I think. It really almost has to be simpler than you think would be fun, if that makes sense.
Well, what's that? There's a was it like Mark Twain or someone? There's some quote. No, he might be attributed for it, but it's sort of like, I would have written you a shorter letter, but I didn't have the time, or something like that. Like alluding to the fact that trying to condense down is actually a lot harder than just like putting it all out.
There's a reason I think that these games are actually harder to design, because they're that ability to make something concise effectively is really difficult. So I would just say, don't just be ruthless in cutting things out, and don't let. You've got to either be more ruthless than normal. I think that's a general thing for game design. I think you've got to be ready to get rid of things that aren't working, or But I think when you try with the mass market, you really have to just. It's harder because, again, it's not gonna. It's maybe for an audience that you're not part of necessarily, or that you wouldn't consider yourself. And the funny thing is, of course, once you cut something out and you think like, would this even be fun? And you play, and you're actually it's still really interesting.
Yeah.
It's sort of unexpected sometimes, and so I think that's a little thing to think about, maybe.
I may have mentioned this the last time you were on the show, but like you put there's some, I think either you were regenerated or you were responding to a thread about a year or so ago on Twitter, with sort of like, game design tips, like just things for people to kind of, things that you've picked up or whatever. And one of them that really got to me was, I think you said, and I'm totally remembering right now, so I could be wrong, but like that, auction, no, is it auction mechanic? No, auction, the blind bidding, the blind bidding mechanic that you've got in your game, get rid of it, basically. And I was just like, how dare you? Like, that's a key part of the game I'm working on, like, right now. Like, but it really got me thinking. And I haven't yet come to where I haven't made a decision with that game if I'm going to get rid of it or not. But it was a really good thing to see, kind of go, oh yeah, maybe just like reassessing everything is okay. Like, it's important to do, because it's possible that in the game I've got, like with this mechanic, that it was useful 3 iterations or 5 iterations ago, but maybe at this stage it actually isn't really relevant anymore, or the game doesn't need it. And yes,
I think it was a thread actually where I was talking about, I'd been judging some Cardboard Edison entries, I think, and I was sort of talking about some takeaways from that.
Yes,
so I think
that makes sense.
No, but I think your point, that's a really good point, and the design process can be so long. And things get internalized. You get used to something, so in fact you think it's actually less complex than it is. So that's also why introducing the game to new people at every stage also really helps, because they'll question things if they don't make sense, even if you're used to it.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Which I guess comes back to just trying to playtest with as many people as you can and do all that sort of stuff. Well, we are at about the 43-minute mark, so I think we might call this one to a close. Thank you very much for your time again and all your wisdom. It's really very appreciated, and maybe we'll have you back on in another 10 episodes time. I don't know. Maybe we'll see what happens, see how it pans out. But there's always a lot to talk with you about, and all the very best for like the nomination. Like, obviously no matter what happens, it's such a like wonderful thing just to be on that list and to have that nomination. And
thank you.
Yeah. So I will do. I know that I've got some links for where people can find you. I was going to say, where can people find you? But I already know the answer, so I don't need to ask you that question. So people can follow you on Twitter. So you're still using Twitter? Because I know Twitter's a bit of a weird place to be right now.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I haven't found any suitable alternatives. So yes,
I'm in the same boat. I'm still figuring out what to do, so I get it. Okay, so Wise Goldfish at Wise Goldfish on Twitter.
Yes, still there.
Now you have your own publishing company though as well.
Yeah, we focus on print and play games effectively. We've released 2 games so far. That's with Rory Muldoon. And we, in fact, have a new Kickstarter for our 3rd game called Waypoints. And the Kickstarter is going to be starting quite soon, in it's on the 20th of June, so that's about 18
So this
days.
is Postmark Games, for those who may not have been seeing the things I was putting on the screen.
Sorry,
No, you don't need to be sorry. I was the one that did it. So if you're looking on Kickstarter, look up Postmark Games and waypoints. So I'm guessing, is it already up there that people can be notified when it's going to go?
Exactly, you can be notified when it launches. So exactly, and it'll be I don't know how many Australian dollars. Probably about $7 Australian, I think, on the conversion for our play games with all their content. So yeah, and check out postmarkgames.com and where we've got our previous games as well. So yeah, another kind of accessible and easy to get, hopefully.
I was looking over the website when I was putting the links together for the episode, and I was reminded that the artwork is so beautiful on the games that you've got on there.
Well, that's Rory. That's all Rory. He's an incredibly talented illustrator and graphic designer.
Yeah, and I really recommend people check out postmarkgames.com. And I'm going to try and order a couple because I had forgotten about them, and I see them oh yeah. And I think it's also just fascinating to me from a game designer point of view, the whole fact that you're making the intentionally print and play or print at home, and the limitations that kind of brings to you as a designer as well. You can't just include whatever components you want, or your sheet size is sort of it's got to be within a certain range. Yeah, so it's very interesting.
No, it's a cool process.
Yeah, well, maybe in the future, maybe that's what we talk about is some of your. I guess you will have had the Kickstarter by then, probably, or maybe in 10 episodes time, who knows? All right, so thank you to everyone that's been here. Thanks for the people in the comments, much appreciated. Where am I going? Oh. Materialise, I'm going to go back to my script. Materialise is produced by Launch Tabletop. If you want to head to launchtabletop.com, you can check out what we do. We have one of our main things is a print-on-demand board game manufacturing service called Launch Lab, so I recommend you check it out. And we do have a discount code, which is Materialise. If you look in the description of the video, you can get the details on that. And thank you, everyone. Thank you, Matthew, again. And I will play. Oh, no worries. I'm the one who it's so good having I really enjoy talking to you, and I find that your breadth of experience, there's just a lot to learn from for me. So it's really interesting hearing.
Oh, well, my pleasure.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. All right. I'll now play the outro music. So thanks again and see you, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.